Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's Bernie Heinze here at FDCC headquarters in beautiful downtown King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Delighted to have you all with us today. What a spectacular hour we have in store for you. I have the privilege of actually introducing you to a good friend of mine, Howard Mortman, who is Director of Communications at C-SPAN down in Washington, D.C. And Howard, as you can see, and as you registered as well, wrote a book called When Rabbis Bless Congress. It is a fascinating tale. As you can tell, I've actually read the book and have gone through it. And I think from all of us who are interested in history and what makes people tick and the background of people that have been given the ultimate privilege of giving a blessing before the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, it is a great read. And I encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to pick one up yet, to get it on Amazon or your favorite independent book dealer. Howard, welcome to the FDCC.
Thank you, Bernie. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Howard and I used to work together, actually at separate times. We never actually crossed paths, but we both worked for a Congressman Jack Kemp from Buffalo, New York back in the day. And I was there in the 70s and 80s, and Howard followed me afterwards and worked with a congressman while he was the Secretary of the Housing and Urban Development, and also when he was in Empower America. So we both share a lot of interesting things, and I'm sure Howard's going to share some interesting thoughts with us here today. So a couple of things before we get started today, folks. If you wouldn't mind, make sure in the upper right-hand corner that you change your view from gallery view to speaker view. That will enlarge the screen fully for you. As well, make sure that if you have any questions or would like to ask Howard any questions, please put them into the chat box. We'll have plenty of time at the end of the presentation to ask Howard those questions as well. And we will also be sure to put a link to this recording of today's webinar into our weekly Friday Fives newsletter so that you can share it with your friends and colleagues, or if you'd like to see it again, you can do that as well. So Howard, I know you have a PowerPoint deck to share with us. Let me first ask you, what inspired you to write this book? How did you come up with the idea of deciding that you wanted to preserve history for the rest of us and talk about why rabbis and how rabbis bless Congress and what they had to say?
Great, thank you, Bernie. It's a wonderful question because it really sets the scene for all of this to come. And I'm going to answer that by first of all assuring everybody you don't have to be Jewish to enjoy the next hour. And even though you're looking at a screen that has the word rabbis in big letters, don't be scared if you're not. This is not a Jewish presentation, and in fact, the inspiration to go to Bernie's question, Bernie, this is not a Jewish book. This is an outgrowth of my work at C-SPAN. At C-SPAN, I'm the communications director. That means I'm the PR guy for a media organization, which is kind of a weird thing to do, to work with reporters and to pitch the story of C-SPAN to other reporters, but that's what I do. As a result of working for C-SPAN, which I hope every one of our audience here watches C-SPAN every day nonstop, but we show Congress. We are the television network that broadcasts live, gavel to gavel, floor coverage of the U.S. Congress, the House and the Senate hearings. We also show the White House and other events around town. As a result of my job, as you might imagine, I watch a lot of Congress, for better or for worse. When they gavel in, when they gavel out. So I see a lot of things that don't get reported. One of the things, and when we get to the presentation, we'll talk about this, that Congress does every day that virtually nobody knows about, is that they open with a prayer. The very first thing they do every session is open with a prayer, even before there is the Pledge of Allegiance, very first order of business. And we'll do the history of this, but this at a very personal level. I was just very intrigued by this whole tradition, this whole custom of opening every session with a prayer. Every so often, and the prayer is delivered by the chaplain. There is an official chaplain of the House, an official chaplain of the Senate. Now, I have to warn everybody, I am not a religious person. I flunked out of religious school. I'm not a rabbi or any of this. So this is, I'm not coming at this from a religious point of view. This is just from a lover of history, just very keen on this tradition of opening with a prayer. On occasion, when the official chaplain is not giving the prayer, they have a guest chaplain. For whatever reason, the official chaplain can't be there, and a guest chaplain of any religion gives the prayer. That happens on rare occasions. On rarer occasions, that guest chaplain is a rabbi. Now, I bring in the fact that I'm Jewish, and so when a rabbi gives the prayer, I just was keen on this. I found this fascinating and wanted to learn more about about who the rabbis were who were giving these prayers. After about 6 years of researching this and going through congressional records and the C-SPAN archives, I came up with a database of every rabbi who ever gave a prayer in Congress. And from that database, I wrote a book. And Bernie, before we get going, I have to tell everybody, I did it all wrong. Anybody, I'm a first-time author, and you ask anybody, they say, don't write the book first, write a chapter, write the table of contents, then try to sell it. I found I couldn't explain this. Like, I had to write this in order to, to tell the story. So I wrote the book, then I started trying to sell it. 100 pitch letters later, I came across a publisher, Academic Studies Press, who said, we get it, and we understand what you're doing, and they published it. So that's really the story of this book. It's about 6.5 years in working. I could not have done it without my day job of C-SPAN, where I see this for a living, and I watch Congress. That's where the idea came from.
That's really cool. So Howard, take us back in history. In reading the book, I think I remember correctly that it was around September 7th of 1774 during the First Continental Congress when a pastor by the name of Jacob Duché was the first one who was invited to bless the Continental Congress. And there was some, John Adams really wrote a really nice letter to his wife about Pastor Duché, and there was some consternation, should we have that, because there were so many different religions represented at the time, and some of the members of our forefathers really didn't want that to happen. So how did this then become a regular thing?
Yeah, I love this part of the history of this is really interesting. Baked into your question, Bernie, it really looms over the whole project, is why is there even prayer at all in the legislative session?
Yeah, because we have the separation of church and state, right? So how do we reconcile that? Exactly
right. And look, this, as you said, the history is very much on the side that prayer is the very first thing that they tackled, even in the Continental Congress. And the very first thing they did was to hire a chaplain. So I have to frame this conversation. This is not, and I know we have a lot of lawyers who are participating in this today and watching this. This is not a legalistic church-state argument for or against. To be honest, I kind of punt on that issue. I don't care about the church-state issues. What I care about is the history. That if I were to get wrapped up in saying Congress should or should not be praying, even though that is settled, even though it is protected by the Supreme Court, to even say, I still don't like it, and then therefore to ignore the history, I think does a disservice to this part of the nation's history. So, this is a practice that over the years has been protected in numerous Supreme Court cases, not just in Congress, but even in city council, state legislatures and others have been challenged. Their whole practice of opening with prayer been constantly ruled on the side of allowing the prayer because, Bernie, as you point out, it's rooted in the very beginning of the country, of our legislative tradition. I will say one thing though, again, so I don't, you can make a solid argument. We shouldn't be doing this. Taxpayers should not be paying for a chaplain. And we pay for a chaplain in the House, chaplain in the Senate, and that's all credible arguments. One thing I would say is that when we get into the issue of guest chaplains, they represent all religions. It shows when guest chaplains get up in front of Congress, not just Jewish, not just Christian, but there have been Muslim, there have been Hindus, there have been others, exhibiting the breadth of religions in the country. And to even take it a step further, even though, again, I'm not a lawyer, but if you talk about the Establishment Clause, if there's any argument that there's no established religion in America, it's this book that shows over 400 rabbis praying in Congress. I mean, on its face, there's no established religion. So again, this is not a church-state book, but it definitely, based on your question, Bernie, it definitely looms over the whole project.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to the founders who had that motto, "In God we trust," right? So that really is the whole aspect. And I think in your book, you described how John Adams wrote back to his wife about the fact that all these people were saying, gosh, we can't let Pastor Duché come in here. We've got Baptists, we've got Episcopalians, we've got Catholics, Presbyterians. But I think Adams probably said it best and said, look, we all pray to the same supreme being. Let's listen to someone that is pious and that has the credibility in their heart and in their soul. Let them come before us and bless us in the undertakings we're going to be undertaking.
Really quick, the funny thing is when I describe this book to people, the first reaction I get is, do they have prayer in Congress? I mean, it's just a very there's a non-understanding of a practice that the history is there and it's in daily. I mean, there's no, this isn't part of the voting and part of the debate in Congress. This is the first thing they do, as you mentioned, God, and God is above the rostrum, above the dais, the word "in God we trust," and it's on the money, the word God. So yeah, God is very much in the fabric of this country.
Yeah, so awesome. Howard, take us through the book. I know you've got a PowerPoint deck with some fascinating historical tales in there and some outtakes from YouTube that you collected from C-SPAN. Walk us through a little bit about the book, and then we'll have time for some questions and answers at the end. Great,
thank you, Bernie. I'm going to show a presentation. There's a lot of video, as Bernie mentioned, some slides. I'll talk through it again. I will stick. I will stay as far away from Jewish and Hebrew jargon as I can and make this is a broad conversation. My entry point are the rabbis, but again, this is applicable to everybody. Just so everybody knows, even though I work at C-SPAN, like everybody else in the world, I'm working remote. I'm coming to you live from the basement of my townhouse in Northern Virginia with my family upstairs. So just kind of sit where I am. So I'm running this PowerPoint on my Mac from downstairs. We've talked about prayers opening Congress every session. Let me just play. There's nothing Jewish about this. Let me just show you what a prayer looks like starting the day in the Senate.
O powerful God, sovereign of this beloved land, you are our fortress, and you desire justice to be done. As our Senate jurors remember their accountability to you, use them to cause justice to roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Lord, during this impeachment trial, give our lawmakers the gift of discernment so that they will know truth from falsehood. Inspire them to commit their thoughts and decisions to you. Let your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is done in heaven. We pray in your mighty name. Amen.
Okay, let me talk about that for a second here. Chaplain Barry Black, a retired Navy admiral, has been the official chaplain of the Senate for about 15, 16 years now. This was typical that how they opened that session of the Senate, February 10th. Atypical that there isn't normally an impeachment trial, but he did talk about that. You heard him, if you know your scripture, you heard him righteous, the water rolled down righteous like a mighty stream. That's from Amos, the Jewish Hebrew prophet. So he's citing Hebrew scripture in his prayer. So Rear Admiral Barry Black retired. The House, I don't have a video from the House. Actually, on the lower, you see a little, because of YouTube, you can see on the lower right here, Margaret Kibben is the House chaplain, Barry Black equivalent in the House. She's new, a couple months in the job, also from the Navy, Presbyterian. This is the first time, by the way, that we've had we've had a woman and an African-American chaplain at the same time, both retired Navy admirals. So it's quite an occurrence right now. But anyways, this is just in general what you see in the beginning of any session of Congress. I'm going to go in 1 second. All right, Bernie led us through a quick history, and here it is, just a timeline of how prayers in Congress began. As Bernie mentioned, Reverend Duché opened the Continental Congress with a prayer in 1774. So we're going to the very beginning here of America. Ben Franklin advocated prayer during the Constitutional Convention. The Senate elected its chaplain in 1789. The House elected its chaplain, Reverend Lynn, in May 1789. And all that happened before there was even the Bill of Rights that was ratified. So this is really baked into the beginning, the roots of our country here. So that's a brief history of prayer in Congress. Guest chaplains. So again, we're talking about guest chaplains. That's the book. That practice began in the 1850s. Guest chaplains, again, for whatever reason, the official chaplain isn't there, ministering to other duties, taking a break, allowing others to play a role, began in the 1850s. My story, this story of rabbis, began in 1860. The first rabbi guest chaplain was in 1860. By the way, it's funny, when I talk to Jews about this, my fellow religionists, they either want to say, what took so long, or, boy, that was fast, depending on how you look at the numbers. 10 years in to the program, they had a rabbi, or, a century later, they had a rabbi. So it's all how you play with the numbers. For me, it's actually pretty fast to get a rabbi in there. But even getting a rabbi for the first time was quite a shock to the system. The first rabbi, guest chaplain, Morris Raphael, February 1st, 1860. Rabbi Raphael, born in Sweden, was the first rabbi, and it was a shock. The members of the House of Representatives didn't know what to make of him. He looked different, looked weird. The press didn't know what to make of this. The New York Times said that he had showed up in his costume, wearing his canonicals. So this was quite a sight in there. Morris Raphael is actually an interesting fellow, pro-slavery. And his ideas on slavery are rooted in the Bible. And there are Morris Raphael scholars out there. But if you look at the rhetoric here, so Bernie, who was president? I'm going to put you on the spot. Who was president on February 1st, 1860?
Oh man, I'd have to Google that one. You'll have to help me out.
Bernie's absolutely right. It was James Buchanan.
Hey.
Yeah, there you go, Bernie. All right, so Abraham Lincoln wasn't on the scene yet. The foreboding of the Civil War was part of what we were about to embark on, and you could even see in some of Rabbi Raphael's language as the first rabbi to pray in Congress, even how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. So he kind of brought in the psalm into this discussion, the foreboding of the Civil War. So Raphael was the first one. Again, he was kind of a celebrity rabbi. He was full of himself, traveled a lot, spoke a lot, but so it kind of made sense in the time that he would be number one. I want to show you video. So that was 1860. I want to show you a more current video of a prayer. The history, let's play this and then I'll come out and show it to you. I'm having problems with my, 1 second. All right.
House Speaker Thomas Foley of Washington will gavel in today's session of the House.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Arthur Leylandveld, Fairmont Temple, Beechwood, Ohio.
O thou whom we address as did our fathers, calling thee Ribono Shel Olam, Lord of the universe, our focus of ultimate value and demand, we ask again the question framed by the prophet 2,700 years ago. What is it, Lord, that thou dost require of us? Micah's ventured assurance was only to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk with restraint before thee. And if this is what is required of all, how much more is demanded of the elected representatives of our nation? Caught as they are by the stresses of political division, public pressure, and legislative conflict, and yet expected to be exemplars of those moral ideals to which our country has always pledged loyalty. In the scriptural history which we associate with thy name, we learn that this dilemma has ancient precedents. Jethro, the Midianite father-in-law of Moses, warned his son-in-law, the great lawgiver himself, that he would wear himself out were he to continue to handle the responsibilities of leadership alone. Hear me, said Jethro. Surround yourself with advisors and aides who are trustworthy, God-fearing, persons of truth who hate corruption. Grant us, Lord, a portion of Jethro's wisdom, that we may shape our public life to reflect that truth and probity to which we have always aspired, that we may fill these sacred halls with a profound concern for social welfare, that we may become models of true patriotic commitment for our children, our successor generations, and that we may set a standard for the nations of the world as we continue to struggle to conquer homelessness, hunger, and lawlessness for the fulfillment of our American vision, a vision of brotherhood, justice, and peace. Amen. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will.
Okay, I want to talk about this for a moment here. I absolutely love this prayer, and I love it for historical reasons. There's a lot wrapped up to it. First of all, Rabbi Lelyfeld died a couple years after he gave this prayer. A historic figure in the American Jewish experience. He was very much involved in Black Jewish relations and went down to the South and marched in the 50s and the 60s with blacks in the civil rights movement. If anybody in the audience recognizes the last name for a different reason, his son Joseph Lelyfeld was once the executive editor of the New York Times. So very there's a lot of history wrapped up into him. His prayer has a lot of very interesting elements. He spoke a little bit of Hebrew. He cited some scripture. He cited the Torah, Jethro. He cited Micah the prophet, walk humbly with your God. And it was also long. Prayers these days are not as long. This is 3 minutes of video time here. It's kind of lengthy, but I think it's kind of impish. It's short, and I liked at the very beginning, you might have seen him looking at the speaker guy, Tom Foley at the time. So this kind of, for me, his prayer is a really solid one, really setting the scene for us. Let's move forward. And all right, let's get right to the numbers. How many rabbis are we talking about? How many rabbis have prayed in Congress? 634 times a rabbi has opened Congress in prayer. Between 1860, that was Rabbi Raphael in October 2020. And if we have time later on, we'll talk about how COVID has affected guest chaplains in general. And that is 441 rabbis. So now why, you're asking why the difference? Why 634 times, 441 rabbis? Why the difference in number? Because many rabbis have given 2 or more prayers. Some have given over 10 and so on. So that's the difference in the numbers there. Roughly 7 or 8 rabbis have given a prayer in Congress every year, going back to World War II. It's not a huge number. We're not talking about rabbis every day praying in Congress, but enough for me, just as an amateur historian, to say, there's enough numbers here to actually do some, to write about this and create a document on this. Now, if you, for fellow Jews in the audience who want to know, well, who's up and who's down, who's given the most, the top synagogues, the ones who have given the most, a lot of people love to see the numbers. Washington Hebrew congregation, 24 times a rabbi from Washington Hebrew congregation has opened Congress in prayer. I will say that my book was written in partnership with Washington Hebrew congregation. They put up, through very generous donors, they put up some money to help get the project going. And it kind of makes sense because they've had the most number of rabbis pray. They're in the area, in the Washington, D.C. area, close by, geographic desirability. It makes sense. But every senior rabbi from ever in Washington Hebrew congregation since 1872 has prayed in Congress. B'nai Jeshurun, that's where Rabbi Raphael was from, the second of the 8. Third place, Addis, Israel, very political synagogue. This is where Ruth Bader Ginsburg belonged, and many politically active Jews in the Jewish community here in DC. I've pulled that from the congressional record. One of the prayers given by a rabbi from Addis, Israel, Solomon Metz, who, now Bernie, I'm going to call on you again. I'm picking on you again. This is a little easier. June 5th, 1944, he prayed in the Senate. Bernie, what happened the next day?
June 6, 1944, a storied day in our history.
Exactly right, D-Day. So
right.
This is the kind of thing where, even though it was somewhat of a secret, what happened the next day, if you read his prayer, you kind of get the sense of, he talks about strife and hate and, righteous and abiding peace, decisive victory. Language in there that you almost wish you can go back and sit in the chamber. It's what it was like to be on the eve of, even though it's still a secret, but you kind of had the sense something massive was happening, and to hear this prayer sweep over the members of the Senate. So I just like the history involved. So this is an Addis Israel rabbi on the eve before D-Day giving the prayer. Names of people, let's put some names to these rabbis. Most prayers by a rabbi guest chaplain. A dear friend of mine who I've gotten to know through this project, Rabbi Arnold Resnikoff, has given the most number of prayers by rabbis, given 17, 8 in the Senate, 9 in the House. He's given the most recent prayer, October of last year, the only rabbi who's given a prayer during COVID era, and there have been very few guest chaplains. Rabbi Resnikoff was a retired Navy chaplain. He fought in Vietnam. He fought in the Mekong Delta. He was also in Beirut when the barracks were bombed back in the early 80s. In 1983, Rabbi Resnikoff also gave the invocation when they dedicated the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial here in Washington, D.C. Rabbi Resnikoff gave the prayer there. So he's given the most, and again, very active in the naval community. And we're going to talk a little bit more in a moment here about rabbis who are also in the military. Number 2, Rabbi Moshe Feller, a Lubavitcher rabbi. For, again, fellow Jews who are in the audience today, Lubavitchers are kind of very ultra observant, and wearing the yarmulke, and we'll talk a little bit more about that more in a second. But he's from Minnesota. Ranks number 2. Ranking number 3, Rabbi Arthur Schneier, a Holocaust survivor, still alive. He has given 7 prayers. We'll go to the Holocaust rabbis in a moment here. And 4th place, he's since passed away, Rabbi Joseph Haberman has given 6 prayers, 6 in the Senate, 1 in the House. In my collection of video of rabbis gave prayers, C-SPAN began in 1979, so I don't have any video of rabbis before then. My first prayer from a rabbi that I have on video is Rabbi Haberman from his prayer in 1985 in the House. And you see a little screenshot there of him in the Senate a couple years later. So those are the top 4 rabbis. By denominations, a little bit of, I can be a little Jewishy here. Roughly a third Orthodox, a third Reform, a third Conservative. Now, when I speak to the Jewish audience, this is very meaningful because the Orthodox, I'm going to do ill if I explain too much of this, but it's really levels of observance of the commandments we're talking about. I'm a Reform Jew, but what I like about this slide, it shows that roughly a third of the main denominations of Jews are represented. This is important. There is no quotas involved in this, meaning the government isn't saying we have to have an Orthodox Jew every time. There are Orthodox, Reform, Conservative Jews basically equally represented, and this happens organically, just naturally, the numbers run like that. Let's talk about women rabbis for a moment here. I love this history. There have been few because the first woman rabbi wasn't ordained until the early 70s. And that first woman rabbi ordained in America is Rabbi Sally Priesand, who was also the first woman rabbi to give a prayer in Congress. She gave a prayer in Congress, becoming the first woman rabbi a year after she was ordained as the first woman rabbi ordained in America. A couple bits of history. Her prayer, October 23, 1973. Bernie, I won't pick on you again. This is a little more obscure, so it's okay. But this was the day that the House passed its impeachment of sending impeachment hearings for the House Judiciary Committee. So again, Nixon was not impeached there, but this was the day they first said that we want the House Judiciary Committee to investigate the possible impeachment of Nixon. She gave the prayer that day. Bit of history there. Her prayer does not mention at all, and here's her entire prayer from the Congressional Record, does not mention at all her pioneering, her milestone, her being the first woman. But the member of Congress who sponsored her very much pointed out she was the first woman. Bernie, can I pick on you? If you remember, and it's okay to pass, but do you remember from the book, or can you even guess who was the member of Congress who sponsored Sally Priesand?
I don't recall.
All right, so okay.
It's the best answer a lawyer can give. I don't recall.
I don't recall, that's my knowledge. The answer is Bella Abzug. was the congresswoman who sponsored her. And if you know your history, this is where history it comes together, and I just love it. Bella Abzug, famous for her hats, but also a pioneering feminist of the time, sponsored her. Her sponsoring remarks were full of, this is the first time a woman has done this. So it's fascinating. One small history here. If you notice, the titling I have in the slide is correct, Priesand. It is incorrectly spelled in the congressional record. You see here, in the second line, Rabbi Sally Priesand, they misspell her name, which is an ignominy for her. It also makes finding her prayer tough in the congressional record, but they got her name wrong in the spelling of it. But other than that, that's her prayer there. So she was the first. How many female rabbis have there been? There have been 15 prayers by 14 women rabbis. The bottom right, Rabbi Hannah Spiro has given the prayer twice. She's the only one who's given the prayer more than once of a woman rabbi. I want to show you a woman rabbi prayer in this video here.
Today's prayer will be offered by a guest chaplain, Rabbi Dina A. Feingold of Beth Hillel Temple, Kenosha, Wisconsin, who is also the sister of the junior senator from Wisconsin.
Let us pray. Source of wisdom, well of justice, fountain of goodness and of peace, we praise you for pouring your spirit upon humanity as we struggle feebly to fashion our society into the kind of world you have envisioned. We cherish your guidance as we strive to bring peace, harmony, and equity to this world in which we are your partners. As these elected officials begin another day of deliberation in the United States Senate, we pray that your presence may dwell among them. Enable them to discern and to acquire but a minute portion of your wisdom and compassion, your knowledge of what is just and right, as they carry out the awesome task of governing our great nation. Grant them insight and endurance as they consider the weighty issues facing our country. Endow them with deep concern for one another, for their constituents, for the people of this nation, and indeed of the entire world. Give them courage to take the difficult stands and to ask the hard questions which must be asked in order to bring wholeness to our broken world. With grateful hearts do we stand before you, framer and fashioner of all that is right and just, for the privilege of living in this land of freedom, where the spirit of goodness is felt keenly by so many. Eternal power of the universe, author of freedom, to you we offer thanks and praise. And let us say,
Oops, oh, sorry about that. Let's, Bernie, I'm going to pick on you one more time, so brace yourself. But this is easy, I promise you this is easy. Rabbi Dina Feingold of Kenosha, Wisconsin was introduced up there by her brother, and her brother's name is?
Senator Feingold.
Yeah, thank you, perfect.
Right?
Exactly right. Perfect. Nailed it. Thank you. You got me.
I'm here all week.
Yeah, perfect. I love it. I'm moving on. Speaks for yourself. Thank you for that. I love it. I'm going to steal that from the next presentation.
Alan Feingold.
Very good. All right, let's move on. All right, I mentioned Rabbi Resnikoff a little earlier. Navy retired. Is given the most prayers. Here's some. I pulled the slide out because there have been many rabbis who have been soldiers, have been military chaplains who have also prayed in Congress as guest chaplains. And here are four who wore their military uniforms, representing all the branches here. Rabbi Stephen Rain in the Air Force represents in the DC area Agudas Achim, which is in Alexandria, Virginia. Gave the prayer recently. There on the right from the Army, there's Rabbi Kenneth Liedwand. I believe this prayer was from the late 1990s. Gave a prayer in the House. Below the bottom, two Navy chaplains, Commander Morris Capro gave two prayers in the Senate, and on the bottom right, also That's Rabbi Harold Robinson, who I believe is in New York now, but he was a chaplain at the Naval Academy. So they wore their the military uniforms and when they prayed in Congress as rabbis. All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, talk a little bit about the demography here. I love this. I love talking about this. This shows, what I'm going to talk about is the ingathering of the beauty of America, the immigration, and all the people who have come here from different countries. About 21 or 22 different rabbis from about 21 or 22 different countries have come to America, become rabbis, and prayed here. Leading the list is Poland. 26 prayers delivered by 19 rabbis who were born in Poland. 24 rabbis delivered by 24 prayers delivered by 16 rabbis born in Germany. This is the heart of the Holocaust here. So what we're talking about essentially is rabbis who survived. When you look at Poland and the Germany numbers, we're talking about the immigration before, during, or after the Holocaust, who survived, came to America, became rabbis, and ultimately prayed in the center of American democracy. And there is a nice little victory over Hitler for you right there. Other countries now, so again, about 20 countries represented, more Latino countries now. There have been rabbis born in Cuba, rabbis born in Argentina, Mexico have rabbis who have moved to America and become rabbis and prayed in Congress. Holocaust, I want to mention Holocaust for a second here. Here are prayers, here are rabbis who have prayed in Congress who survived the Holocaust. Also, believe it or not, Auschwitz survivors. On the left, Rabbi Isaac Newman gave the prayer, twice prayed in Congress, prayed in 1983, but also here at the Congressional Record in 1970. Survivor of Auschwitz, survived Buchenwald. April 11th is the anniversary. He's passed away, but April 11th is the day that he was rescued by the American troops. When they come and they pray in Congress, these survivors all exhibit a love of America. Their language is full of thank you to America. Bernie, I picked out one for you. There's Jack Kemp sponsoring Morris Shapiro, also a Buchenwald survivor. I believe this was April 75, I believe. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, right there, April 75, April 8th, 75. Jack Kemp sponsored Morris Shapiro. Dov Edelstein, also Auschwitz survivor. On the lower right is a picture of Rabbi Berkowitz, who died 3 months ago, was my rabbi. My synagogue is Temple Road of Shalom in Falls Church, Virginia. Survivor of Auschwitz, rescued by the 82nd Airborne, gave the prayer June 14th, 1988 on Flag Day, sponsored by Congressman Frank Wolf. And his prayer was just full of love of America. And he just always blessed the 82nd Airborne for coming and rescuing from Auschwitz. Gave the prayer in 1988, again died in December of 2020. All right, I want to shift gears. I know we have a lot of lawyers here. Lawyers like rules. So you're going to ask yourself, after all of this, the video and seeing pictures, what are you allowed and what are you not allowed to talk about? These are the House rules. This is what are the instructions given to guest chaplains in the House. The length of the prayer should not exceed 150 words. Point number 2, very important, free from political views. They're not there to lobby for or against legislation. They're not voting. They're not trying to influence. This is a message from their heart to God. Entirely in English. By the way, I have to say, on that point, you're already saying, Mortman, you just showed me a video of a prayer with Hebrew in it. What are you, lying already? You're perjuring yourself in front of all these lawyers. These rules are evolved, and these have changed over time. I'm not sure when these rules came into effect. They're fairly recent in the scheme. Definitely the 150 words and is new, as we've seen in the video prior, much lengthier than that. So these are kind of evolving rules appearing in the Congressional Record. And I actually like this last one. Should not make any introductory remarks. We just begin the prayer, kind of like, you can't say, well, it's a really pleasure to be here, and having you from out of town and all that. So you have to get right to the prayer. The Senate has similar rules. This is really cool. So as a result of this project, I've gotten to know some rabbis who have given prayers. A rabbi, Jeffrey Stiffman, still alive, shared with me, actually just a couple of weeks ago, this document that I'd never seen before, and I love it. And it's a primary source document of the instructions he was given when he was the Senate guest chaplain in '78. Now, when Rabbi Stiffman shared this with me, he made point to me that the then chaplain, and you see his name here, Edward Elson, the official Senate chaplain, was not too keen on Jews and of Israel. And Rabbi Stiffman made that point by pointing out exclusively in its entirety English language, free from reference to the National Day of Observance of any other nation. And there's a couple other coded references in here that he thought was geared toward him as a Jew and the potential of Israel being mentioned in the prayer. So take it for what it is. I will defer to him on that, but it's just kind of interesting to see that kind of strong rhetoric, strong language we put in this introductory letter here. What have they talked about in the prayers? Here's some content. It runs the gamut: war and peace, including the Holocaust, diversity, freedom of values, environment, space. A lot of these prayers, and as an amateur historian, I love these prayers are kind of like capsules in time of reflecting what's happening in the world. A lot of space-related prayers, the space shuttle, the Mercury mission, going to the moon, the Apollo mission. If these are big events happening in America at the time, they've worked their way into the messages of the rabbis. And again, I have to say, it's very important. We're not talking just rabbis here. All the prayers at the time given by all the chaplains all reflect what's happening at that moment in America's history. I narrow in just because that's my story here, but this is very reflective of non-Jewish clergy members. And of course, at the bottom, American institutions, Congress, government, all being invoked. Prophets are mentioned. The big winner, Isaiah. Isaiah cited in 70 prayers by rabbis, over 1 out of every 10 times. The most commonly cited Isaiah line is the one Isaiah 2:4. And you probably have know this, nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. The pruning hooks line. Another big one is Leviticus, the line that's on the Liberty Bell about democracy is also often cited. I geeked out over this. Going through my research, going through the congressional record, and lo and behold, finding Hebrew in the congressional record itself is really amazing. For some reason, I don't know why, a lot of the Hebrew in the congressional record was printed in the 1960s. So here are examples from that era. And you don't have to read Hebrew, know Hebrew to see those letters there. And it's kind of stunning to see this. The one on the right, the Morris Silverman of Hartford, you see his transliteration below the Hebrew letters in there. Adonai, the Spirit of the Lord, Ruach, Ma, Lavina. Bernie, I won't call on you to read the Hebrew. Don't worry, I'm not going to call on you to join this slide here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Move on. Okay, so let's. This is the ultimate geek slide here. This is where sabermatics come into play in the study of rabbi guest chaplains. Through my research, 66 rabbis have prayed in both the House and the Senate. And you know this only by running the numbers, 13 rabbis have prayed in the House and the Senate on the same day, meaning gridlock, meaning that if you go to either the House or the Senate that day, you see a rabbi giving a prayer in both chambers. Happened 13 times. 1892 was the first. 1994 was the most recent. I'm actually, just for time, Bernie, I'm going to skip this one because I know I'm taking too long. CNN reported Rabbi Resnikov's prayer in 2019. This was after the attacks in the synagogue in Monsey, New York. He spoke about coming together. CNN reported that. I'm just going to, for time, because I do want to leave room for this final video before we go to questions. And Bernie knows this. Bernie worked in the House. When a member of Congress, when a rabbi is a guest chaplain, he or she is sponsored by a member of Congress, senator, and they have to give introductory remarks. Typically, sometimes they trip over the Hebrew. So let's just let this video speak for itself. Let it play.
Will be in order. In today's opening prayer, will be a guest of Senator Mark Warner. Will be offered by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Israel Zilberman, founding rabbi of Congregation Beth Shavram in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
The prayer will be offered by a guest chaplain, the Rabbi Wayne Dossett, the Elijah Manhayan, La Costa, California.
The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, the Rabbi Richard Baruch Rabinowitz, Aish International, New York, New York. The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, the Rabbi Thomas A. Lockheim, Congregation Or Kadash, Tucson, Arizona.
It will be offered by the guest chaplain, Reverend Erwin N. Goldenberg, Temple Beth Israel, York, Pennsylvania.
The prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Stephen Roth, a congregation Eitz Kahim, Passaic, New Jersey. Prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Michael Siegel, Anshe Emet Synagogue, Chicago, Illinois.
Today's prayer will be offered by guest chaplain, Rabbi Shem Shon Sherrill, Congregation Keho Zeke Ron Mordecai, Brooklyn, New York.
Prayer will be offered by guest chaplain, Rabbi Moshe Feller, Lubavitch House, St. Paul, Minnesota.
Today's prayer will be offered by guest chaplain, Rabbi Mel Heck, Temple Beth Ann, Las Vegas, Nevada, a guest of Senator Harry Reid.
As Rabbi Harlig mentioned in his invocation, today is significant. It's significant because it's the day of the Shabbat community, important the day in the Shabbat community. It's the 15th anniversary of the passing of Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, one of the great Jewish leaders of our time.
Rabbi Feller has been a leader in the Twin Cities Jewish community for over 30 years. Accompanying the rabbi today were 20 students from the Habab Academy located in St. Paul, Minnesota, and completed postgraduate Judaic studies at the Lubavitch Yeshiva in Brooklyn, New York. Since 1988, Rabbi Green has served as the Lubavitcher Rebbe emissary to Rochester.
Madam Speaker, I want to talk about Rabbi Hyman, who just gave the opening prayer. There is a midrash, one of the many parables that embellish upon the Torah. In this particular midrash, there is a man from the land of Israel, a businessman who was in another country.
I would say that in addition to his spiritual guidance, he introduced me to Cholent, which for this Presbyterian was a new experience. I think I thank him for introducing me to that part of his history and culture, if not exactly for the culinary experience. Welcome, Rabbi Wiederhorn, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
Okay. If you don't have to speak Hebrew to know they mangled most of that. Bernie, I think that is my final slide. I am going to stop sharing now. And I'm going to come back to you, hopefully.
That's perfect. That's perfect, Howard. Thanks. Great presentation. Thank you for all of that. I think we also have to help our congressmen and senators properly pronounce the word Passaic, New Jersey. You would think that if you're introducing someone in the House of Congress, you'd at least get the names right? But no, and by the way, Senator Russ Feingold's family just called on the phone while you were doing that. He said, it's fine. He actually goes by Alan to his friend. He's in the witness protection program now, so it's all good. But listen, we've got a couple of minutes left for Q&A. And for those of us, our members who are watching today, if you'd like to ask Howard a question, just put it in the chat box and we'll go ahead of it. We have one question here, Howard, that's come in. In the book, there are times in which you quote the congressional record, and the word God is spelled G-D. Why is that done in the congressional record that way?
Yeah, I love that. In fact, it's one of the slides I think I had GD, because for very observant Jews, they don't even say the name God. They'll say Adonai, which is or the Lord or the Almighty, because of the sacrosanct nature of the word. That translates over to print. They don't even want to put the word G-O-D in there, because on paper, paper gets trashed, gets thrown away and burned. And so you can't desecrate God's name that way. So to avoid burning God, the name God, they'll put the hyphen in there to get around it. We know what it means, but that's just a way of protecting the sacredness of his name.
Interesting.
Yeah,
interesting. Another question, Howard's come in. You talk in the book, for instance, about some historical events that have taken place. Are there any that stick out particularly in your mind where a rabbi or another guest chaplain has come up and given a blessing around a particular event in history?
You know what? I love that. Some of the most profound prayers are those that occurred during wartime. Two that come to mind: the prayers that happened during the Vietnam War really reflect the mood of America. You see in some of and not just the rabbi prayers, all the prayers in the early 60s when we're beginning more hubris, more marching, our boys kicking out the communists. Some of that language came through into the prayers. On the flip side, on the tail end of the war, on the other side, you start seeing the "come bring our soldiers home and we have to repair the world" language. So you kind of see history, the conventional American history, also being reflected in prayers. Also, the war on terror. We're coming to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Boy, some of the prayers around then, not just rabbis, but all the prayers, but I'll mention the rabbis because that's what I studied, really talk about the Twin Towers. They talk about recovery for months. I mean, it's obvious, but you really do see it. To look back in history and see that language in there 20 years later, and you see the language of months and months of talking about the damage done to America as reflected in the prayers. It's really interesting to see that.
Yeah, very cool. Hey, there's another thing that I wanted to ask you about in your book. I read, and I actually tabbed one of the pages because it was really interesting to me. There was an invocation given on April 19th, 1967 by Rabbi Gershon Chertoff. And he opened the house with a tribute to the United States Constitution. One of the lines that he said in his prayer was to kindle a legal conscience in the heart of the nation. What a profound phrase that is, to kindle the legal conscience in the heart of the nation. Did you see any other aspects of the rule of law or justice or legal issues where chaplains or rabbis have talked about that in their blessings of the House or the Senate?
Yeah, I love that question that came in because there are mentions of the U.S. Constitution in several of the prayers. Also, for the more observant Jews, we talk about the Lubavitchers. There are a set of laws called the Noahide Laws, and I'm not going to get too far in the weeds, but those are kind of the universal laws that apply to all mankind, not just to Jews, that the really observant religious Jews believe in. So for them, the rule of law is very important. So there are a couple prayers that are more legalistic. By the way, I'm glad that question mentioned Rabbi Chertoff. Bernie, can you guess him by the last name who Rabbi Gershon Chertoff's son is?
No.
Michael Chertoff, the first Secretary of Homeland Security.
Oh, wow.
So his rabbi. So it's kind of interesting. Michael Chertoff is a very high-powered lawyer in D.C. His father mentioned law in his prayer and was a Talmudic scholar, scholar of Talmud for decades in New Jersey. So law runs deep in the Chertoff family there.
Interesting. Howard, we talk a lot in our organization about Federation exceptionalism, about things that go above and beyond the call of duty and members who are above and beyond many of their peers. There's a chapter in your book that talks about American exceptionalism. How did the prayers and blessings reflect that concept of the American story?
Yeah, the easy way to answer that, and this is so important, is the immigration story. It's coming to America, surviving the Holocaust, or nothing to do with the Holocaust, or just coming here, the waves of immigration in the early 20th century, and finding a place. This is really important because this actually goes back to the overall theme of our discussion. The ability to pray as a Jew in Congress is extraordinary. It's an exhibition of the greatness of America. And I'm not being political here, but it's the exceptionalism is real because a rabbi can pray in the center of the democracy. And for instance, Israel does not open with a prayer. The Knesset does not open with a prayer. So if you're a rabbi and you want to open a legislative body with a prayer and you live in Israel, you can't do it there. You have to come to America. So the very nature of being able to practice being accepted and welcomed as a rabbi praying is an American. It's not uniquely American. There are many countries that have this, but it definitely is a feature. And the fact that there have been over 400 rabbis giving over 600 prayers is a cause for these rabbis to celebrate. I can do this. We are in a country that welcomes this and gives me the opportunity to do so. So the prayers include language celebrating that.
Yeah, I found it fascinating that in our country, probably unlike many other countries of the world, your chapter on immigrant rabbis and chaplains was fascinating, because what other country in the world is letting other religions come before them, or people from other lands who immigrated to their country come before them and invoke a prayer upon the legislative bodies?
Yeah, and I have to point out, it's very important that that when they talk about their immigration stories, and they are not being political, they are not tying it to controversial legislation, they're tying it to their life story. Their life story is immigration. That they are children of immigrants. They themselves are immigrants, children of Holocaust survivors. So they're not talking about, the controversies we face every day as a country. How do you deal with the border and so on? We're talking about very in their blood. It's ingrained in their life story, who they are, and their story is the story of immigration here.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, 2 last questions are coming to the end of our time. Did you find any prayers that were duds in your research?
Between you and me, Bernie, and everybody's listening, yes. So I probably shouldn't say this because I'm not a rabbi. It's far from me to judge. I'm certainly not the Almighty here. Roughly in my book, I've mentioned by name roughly 70% of all the rabbis who gave prayers in Congress, because in some way, either their prayers really were interesting, or said something unique at a different angle, or exhibited just a bigger story, or them personally, their life story was interesting. There are occasions I found where I couldn't make anything out of it, just the team phoning it in, just nothing really terribly inspirational in the prayers or about them personally. I won't mention who they are because that'd be a bad thing. But no, I found there were prayers that just did nothing for me, and therefore I still have a record of them, but I just didn't write about them.
Well, the good news is you're still in your basement in your townhouse, right? You're not close to any windows, so there won't be any bolts of lightning coming through to strike you down. So a last question in light of the duds, give us the MVP, the most valuable prayer. You've looked at all these prayers throughout our history. What's the one that inspired you or stuck out to you the most, if you had to pick just one?
Yeah, so actually I'm not afraid to answer this question, and I will answer this question. I'm going to do a little bit of a twist on it, though. My favorite story from the prayers on a personal level happened about 4 or 5 months ago. I have put all these prayers, after the book came out, while it was being published, I put all the prayers on YouTube, prayers for where there is video. Now, again, C-SPAN began in '79. Any prayers before that is lost to history. You can't see it. But there are about 200 prayers I have on YouTube. One of them I put on video was a rabbi who I thought gave a really good prayer, fascinating, a Rabbi Maurice Lyons. Rabbi Maurice Lyons of St. Louis, Missouri, gave the Senate prayer in
1994.
Exactly, 1994. And I thought it was a great prayer. I think I mentioned in the book, but like others, a really good prayer. But I never really reconsidered it until a couple months ago. I got an email from the family of Rabbi Maurice Lyons of St. Louis, Missouri. And he has since died, and they were marking his yahrzeit. And the yahrzeit is the anniversary of the death. So they were marking Rabbi Lyons, the anniversary of his death. And they're Googling around, and they came across this prayer that I had mechanically posted on YouTube, because I put all the prayers on YouTube. They had never seen it before. They didn't even know he gave a prayer. And in fact, for the grandkids, they never even heard his voice. So their first encounter with Rabbi Maurice Lyons of St. Louis, Missouri, was this prayer that I put on YouTube from him giving the prayer in the Senate. And he sent me a note saying how they couldn't have been nicer and thrilled. And I sent a note back saying, I'm even more thrilled to make this personal connection, to have it all come to life. So it really, that for me, that's, we talk about excavating history. We talk about a passion project of discovering a lane. This family would not have known. They might have known he gave a prayer, but never would have seen it or even heard his voice. So that's just like two worlds come together. And for me, that's probably the most personally meaningful story out of the book.
That's awesome. Howard, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with us today. Really appreciate it. And more importantly, thank you for taking the time to do the research to write this book and preserve a part of history that otherwise would never have been written. Folks, the book again is When Rabbis Bless Congress, It's available on Amazon or at your favorite independent bookseller. You'll love it. I went through it in about a weekend. It's a great book. It's a great piece of history filled with interesting tidbits. And for me, another interesting fact was the stories of the rabbis. So Howard's not just told us what the prayers were or the history behind the prayers, but a history of the person that gave them. And I think when we talk about what we do as individuals, that story of the person is all that's important. So folks, thank you so much for joining us today for another edition of our weekly webinar series. I hope you'll join us again next Wednesday. We've got a couple more webinars this week as well. Please check the Friday Fives and you'll get other blast emails with the schedule of those as well. But for today, have a safe and healthy afternoon. Howard, thanks again for joining us today. Be well, everybody.